It is time for the Cyber Executive Podcast, where we'll be talking with top executives about risk, technology, and leadership. I am your host, Mark Ashworth, and today I have the pleasure of having my friend Randy Raw, who is the CISO with Veterans United Home Loans, here today. Randy, thank you very much for being here as a guest on my second episode of the Cyber Executive Podcast.
Hey, Mark, glad to be here.
I know you've done a lot of public speaking and everything, and I've sat and listened to you talk a lot around some great keynotes around leadership and building effective teams. So what are some challenges that you face with four generations in the workforce now? So what are you seeing there? What are you doing to help encourage the great leadership?
Yeah, it's really an interesting time because we do have four generations, particularly in cybersecurity. And if you expand it a little bit, there's five generations in the entire workforce, although many of the oldest generations are either emeritus or some sort of role. But as you look across the generations, there are some pretty significant differences in the worldview of the people, the motivations of each of the generations, and then also I think it's an outcome of that, of the communication styles and mechanisms that I think when you also overlay the pace of change, particularly of technology, I think there's a lot of explanation of, wow, that each generation that is building something new that's better for the following generation, those following generations use that technology, but they use it in a different way than the creators of the technology thought they would. An example is many of us that are in the late baby boom, maybe the early to middle generations after that of Gen X, built the internet, and we enabled a lot of capabilities. The millennials came along and began using the internet and innovated more, particularly around communication styles. Our generation had mostly telephone and traditional telephone, and that's how we communicated. Then the millennials came along and they had the internet. They've never not known a time without a cell phone, particularly an iPhone. They've never not known a time without PCs because the PC was invented in 1983 and the millennial generation started around 1980, 89, or 80, 81. So those generations, the younger generations, are using the technology, but they're using it differently than we would expect. And so when you have a new person coming right out of college, they're not used to using email. And that's just a specific example. Email is the communication media that most of our companies run on. So you almost have to educate those new employees. And this is how we use email. And this is why we're not able to use maybe WhatsApp, maybe whatever other social media tool that they're used to using to communicate with their friends. And so to some degree, it's an education process that we've not really had to face in the same way in previous generations.
Yeah, I do think very much so that the younger generations are bringing that that different styles and different needs, and making us really realize what we're better ways of doing business, for that matter,
Yeah.
in some ways, and better customer service, and embracing the technology better within the organizations and stuff. And along with that, are there other things that you're seeing that the younger generations are bringing to the table that maybe someone our age or older might not be bringing from that? So
Yeah, I think there's one that it's a knife that's sharp on both sides. It's a heightened awareness of self-care and what a lot of people might call work-life balance. For older generations, your work was your worth, and maybe work still is your worth. Younger generations see that as a totally different equation. They don't see work as an end of itself. It's a means for something, and the younger generations are content to. So we're also seeing some polarization here a little bit. Some of the younger generation is content to say, I don't have to make a whole lot of money. I can have more sustenance or subsistence sort of perspective. May even be willing to live at home longer, that sort of thing. There are others that are way out there. I saw a survey the other day that said that the the current thought of how much money it takes to earn to be successful that the Gen Z generation would make, they said $600,000 a year. I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, that's crazy. Um, and so there are some real disparities of what that looks like. But the younger generations, and I think they always have, they bring energy, enthusiasm, willingness to learn. Um, this particular thing that we see the data around Gen Z is there's also a fairly large contingent that are fairly apathetic and entitled.
Mhm.
And the challenge for us in business is how do we find the eager, energetic, enthusiastic, willing to learn people and avoid the apathetic and entitled ones? Because you don't want that on your team. So,
Mhm.
having good screening processes, having good ability to talk to people and find out really what is it they're wanting to do, is going to be key. More key probably than we've ever seen in the past, because this generation also has just gone through, the youngest generation has gone through COVID, where they
Mhm.
went through a lockdown when they were either in high school and or college. I mean, we're seeing 7 and 8 year athletes in NCAA competition.
Mhm.
Who thought 8 years was going to be something that anybody would ever have of eligibility to play sports? But we see the same sort of thing. Their whole experience is different than what previous generations were, and so normal looks really different.
Mhm.
And so there's an opportunity there for some adaptation and for us to learn, as the existing established leaders, what's it look like to lead a younger team.
Yeah, and I do want to point out too the empathetic and the entitled. There's a percentage of that is in every generation,
You're
right?
right. Yeah.
And I think the one big thing that's now more visible is just because of social media and how fluid everything is, it becomes more apparent. Like a lot of you could talk, whether it's crime or whatever. Uh, it seems like there's more. Well, it's probably the same as what it's always been. It's
Yeah.
just it floats up so much quicker now,
Yeah.
and you're seeing it from so many different channels and not
Yeah.
what is just on the nightly news that had just a very small snapshot of
Yeah.
things that's going on.
Well, and even that is enabled by our technology. I mean, when we were growing up as kids, it took a while for news from around the world to get to us.
Mhm.
And then it was vetted through some fairly significant filter processes of the news media of, is this newsworthy? Is it not newsworthy? Now with social media, anything could potentially be newsworthy. I mean, so this is both, again, good and bad. The younger generations have figured out ways to be very innovative and come up with new roles. What is an influencer anyway?
Mhm.
It's somebody who lives on social media and they communicate and they try to set trends. We've always had influencers. They were typically Hollywood actors and actresses or sports uh, figures of some sort. Now it's their actual practices of how do you develop a followership? How
Yeah.
do you do brand marketing of yourself? And so, yes, it does, I think, bring forward things that we just never saw before. They just never floated to the top. I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with that, there's a lot more collaboration that is occurring with this.
Yeah.
And with the diversity of the number of generations and just the communication that's happening and the willingness to and importance to communicate. How are you building diverse teams now and building that trust and keeping that collaboration going between the generations and and not even generation, that's probably not even the right area to really be talking about it anymore, but
Yeah.
just to keep in that good collaboration because, you might have a percentage of the force that is hybrid, which obviously I am. I mean, I'm not a lot of, people are have a pool table in their office and stuff in an office building, but a lot of people are hybrid or maybe fully work from home. So
Right.
what some key things that you see on building that collaboration and trust in a diverse team, however that diversity might be.
Yeah. So this is a great question. And before about 6 or 8 months ago, I would not have had as good of an answer as I'm going to give you right now. And I'm going to reference this book because David Burkus wrote a book called Best Team Ever. And in that book, he talks about three pieces that are important for collaboration and trust. The first one is common understanding. And it really is about the human element of how do we develop a common understanding involving first clarity and second empathy. And we just talked about empathy just a few minutes ago. In a remote or a hybrid environment, you've got to be exceedingly clear at what are the expectations of output. When you've got everybody around you physically every day and you're coming into an office, it's way easier to have a less clear goal and purpose because it's immediately possible for you to go and talk with somebody and to touch base on a very frequent basis. And as humans, we do that. As social creatures, we do that. When you introduce that space issue or the space separation, and you now struggle somewhat to know, well, I don't know if Mark's working, if he's on a call. It says he's on a call, but he was on the same call I was on and we just hung up. So it's reading the calendar and I really don't know your presence. I really don't know your status. And so it's harder to have those incidental or the drive-by sort of things where I know I can say, hey, Mark, I was working on this. I got a question. Can you help me with that? It requires a lot more intentionality. The second thing that David would say is psychological safety is the second part. And that is building trust and respect. A lot of people will jump right in and say, you got to build trust first. And I've talked to David about this, and he says, well, really, if you don't have clarity and empathy, you can't have trust because trust is built on clarity and empathy. And I really hadn't thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. When you also factor in cybersecurity, particularly where we both work, there are a lot of people that have strong neurodiverse traits. And you can see neurodiversity in a couple lenses. On the extreme end is where you might have autism or ADHD, and there may not be a functional aspect, but there are lots of traits about people that we would see in our workspace: the ability to focus for long periods of time, the ability to recognize patterns quickly, to become a subject matter expert almost overnight. I would a lot of times refer to this as become a human AI engine. Those traits require a longer time to build trust, and it starts with clarity and empathy. I think if we do those things and we get to know our teams, and that also helps us with a diverse team. If you're talking about gender diversity, race diversity, even I would say a lot of times it's age diversity.
Mm-hmm.
We started kind of talking about that, but those ability to create a common understanding and psychological safety are the first two steps to really getting a team off on the right track, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are some really good points, and some good strategies on there. And one of the things too with this, I think modern workforce, and it'll be interesting to see where we go with this return to office initiative that some organizations are going back to, even the federal government for that matter now. But that's going to bring a different challenge of remotivating and inspiring the team, because now their lives that they've been doing for the last 5 years is being disrupted again. And maybe they were fully remote or hybrid, and they're balancing their work life stuff, and now they're having to go back to more of a 9 to 5, 8 to 5 type job and everything else. So what are some tips that you have around motivating and inspiring your teams to achieve goals, to keep the business, keeping your department, keeping your own initiatives moving forward for your department?
Yeah. So I want to address first the kind of the way we've talked about in our team of that. How do you navigate where you work from? One of the things that we found was we started talking with our team leads and saying, okay, let's use some different language, because remote, hybrid, premise has a lot of energy and a lot of context around it that may not be helpful. What if we talked about it from the standpoint of, are we doing transactional work? And in security, we do a lot of transactional work, whether it's looking at logs, whether it's doing an individual incident response, investigating something that you don't really need any help with. You're reading a contract for third-party risk management. You're doing something with application security around software or something. Transactional work. I don't really have a preference of where you do the work. Have I set enough clarity around what that looks like of the output of what the expectation is? then do that wherever you need to do that, wherever you're best at that. Prior to COVID, we were sending people home anyway to do deep work. Cal Newport
Mhm.
wrote a book called Deep Work, and he talked about for particularly people that have individual contributor roles that do a lot of this transactional work, they need 4 or 5 uninterrupted hours a day to really get into the flow of things and to be able to just get the work done. On the other hand, collaborative work, and Apple tried some of this, and I think they were moderately successful. When you're doing collaborative work, as the human species, we know being in the same place is better.
Mhm.
If we're on a whiteboard, there's something about smelling the whiteboard marker that gets you going and seeing somebody draw. And then you'll hear somebody like, oh, yeah, what about this and that? And the whole ideas begin to come together better. And there's magic when that happens. That's collaborative work. There's also the collaborative work of, you know, two people that do a basic similar job, one being stuck and being able to just swivel in the chair and say, hey, Mark, I got a question. Can you look at this? And they need to look at your screen.
Mhm.
That's a valuable thing as well. Can that be done remotely? Yes. Does it take more energy, effort, and intentionality? Yes.
Mhm.
If we begin talking about it in those sort of terms, though, that's helped just lower the temperature on our teams and talk about the things that are important of, okay, what is the transactional work that has to get done? Daily stand-ups are great for that. You can do that, and everybody talks about that. Now, when do we need to come together and collaborate? Let's make sure we're in the office collaborating, and we've let our team leads and managers determine that on our teams as much as possible. And everybody has said they want to be in the office as much as possible. We have not had people in the far-flung regions. I do have a couple of people that we hired during COVID that are out of state and they work remotely, and we make it work. But we all admit it's too easy to mistakenly leave them out of the conversation, and
Mhm.
especially the decisions that were made. So one of the things we started doing during COVID was in Slack, we created a channel that was decisions made. Even if it was two people going to lunch and they made a decision and they came back and didn't tell the other 6 people on the team, we'll just put it in the Slack channel. So
Yeah.
then that way you can say, hey, here was a decision that we made. And then everybody can weigh in on it. And then when a new person joins the team, they just review the decisions made Slack channel. So there are tools that we can do, but I think those help a lot.
Mhm.
You also ask another question in that first question of how do you accomplish goals? And from my standpoint is it's important to have a shared goal. It's important for the employee to be invested in and provide their part of what they see as a goal. What do they want to work on? Can we structure the goals so that it's something that they want to do? Because now there's naturally more motivation. It was my idea. I'm going to do this. If I tell you something you got to do, you're less likely to do it than if you say, hey, I got this idea. What do you think about this?
Mhm.
You're probably going to just bust down everything to make sure you accomplish that goal because you want to be seen as someone who came up with a great idea and can get it done.
Yeah, one back even before COVID, I always kind of um, followed a concept from Stephen Covey around what they call WIGs, wildly important goals. And every week we would touch base, and the team would set what their goals are for
Mhm.
that upcoming week.
Yeah.
And it should be 2 to 3 goals each week, but it depends on the team. Some of them they can really crank through things, so it becomes
Right.
4 or 5 goals. And then, you could tell whenever they don't get a goal done, for whatever reason. And so then it's like, okay, I got to leave that on there. And then, and if it goes to a couple weeks, you can tell that it gets to them. But, once we swung over into COVID and was working from home, that accountability became all that much more important
Yeah.
because they knew exactly what they needed to get done. And as long as they got done with what they were doing, I knew that they were performing. So when they were coming in and saying, yeah, I got 1, 2, 3 all done, I'm going to do 4 and 5. I couldn't do, one of them because of I needed someone else to help me with this, and it ended up or whatever, or I had to call support. That's great. At least, you're hitting the goals off of there and you're driving accountability. They're being empowered to
Yep.
come up with things that they know that they need to do to accomplish whatever the strategic outcomes are and those sort
Yep.
of things. So So, that's a way that I'm empowering, my team members. What about yourself? What are you doing to empower your members and taking ownership of their work?
Very similar. Helping establish clarity around what success criteria looks like and what the timing looks like. And if we've hired the right people on the front end and they understand what the mission of the organization is and how their work ties into that mission, it's a natural outcome of people want to be successful. Using your COVID as an example, when everybody first got sent home from COVID, we kind of thought it was about a 2 week, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And so there was a lot of self motivation to say, I want to show that I can do this. And there was just internal drive because the clarity was not lacking. We knew what we already had to do. It's interesting to me. We talk about digital transformation now, and it's like, boy, if you didn't transform during COVID, I'm not sure how you're even still a business. I don't know
Yeah,
if there's
you're
real
too
still
far behind at
digital
this point.
transformation to go, but um, it was self motivation. Then as COVID drug on, there were successful teams that continue to do exactly what you're talking about. They continue to set their own work. They were setting their own pace. We almost were on the brink of maybe what you might consider burning people out because they still, even though they were working from home, they weren't doing good work-life balance. They were still working a lot of hours because we had these massive backlogs for most of our teams, and they found themselves so much more productive. They were able to get that backlog shrunk, and everybody wanted to keep doing that.
Mhm.
There came a point at which we recognized, okay, COVID's here for a while. How do we now balance some of that out and take the foot off the gas?
Mhm.
So I think we would do ourselves a big service if we go back and think about what was it and talk with our teams. What was motivating to you at the first part of COVID? Why were you so productive? What things were there? And pull from that and talk with our teams about how can we replicate that mindset, that motivation. And I think what we'll find is, and I think this is also with younger generations, agency and what I work on, how I work on it, when I work on it.
Mhm.
There's a lot of that, particularly again going back to that generational thing. Uh, a lot of people are night owls, and they're not early morning people.
Mhm.
So can you let people work at different times and accommodate that? There are some things you can and some things you can't, but anything you can make work more human and appeal to more of the human aspect of what we want to do, I think that's how you empower team members to really own their own work.
Yeah, and there, you know, there's a balance of allowing them to have that freedom to get that 8 hours in somewhere in and outside of the
Right.
normal business hours, to balancing that to being able to collaborate with their team that majority might still be working in
Yeah.
that normal business hour standpoint, and especially from a support, where IT security, you're that support function, so you got to kind of be there, but
Yep.
then you could definitely see that on the dev teams and some of the other teams
Yeah.
that might be just strictly down on the keyboard most of the time, and their collaboration might be with an analyst or a BA or someone along that line to uh, and just coordinating time with them on that part of it, and then step away and then do their coding. You hear tons of coders that's working in, they don't even start until 10 p.m. and then they
Right.
go to about 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So that's just how their creative juices go.
Yep.
So with all of this, there's definitely, as a leader, you have having to be able to provide constructive feedback and to promote growth and development. What are some of the ways that you do that, or that you see others providing that constructive feedback? Because it can be
Yeah.
challenging if you're remote versus face to face.
It for sure is. It's challenging face to face, more challenging remote, because there's something about a face to face interaction that if you've got to say a difficult thing, it's easier to do face to face. What we're doing right now is sometimes the best face to face you're going to be able to get, because if someone is literally around the world or even a couple time zones away, even just a couple hours away, you can't wait on some of those things. Um, I'm going to circle back a little bit to knowing your people and knowing who has what neurodiverse traits and how they respond to constructive feedback. is really an important part. So knowing the person of how they're going to take something and what you have to say, also knowing the difference, and I struggle with this, between nice and kind.
Mhm.
Oftentimes I'm nice, and nice is not the right thing. Because I don't actually talk about what the real issue is. It's kind if I actually talk about the real issue in a way that is also kind and not demeaning to the person, but lay it out. Here's where we
Mhm.
are. Here's where the gap is, and here's where we've got to get to, or these are the outcomes that are going to happen. If I can do it that way, it also takes the emotion out of it, and I can stick to data and details.
Mhm.
Um, and and unless it's an actual behavioral issue, you're going to find, I at least have found, it's better to approach it in that way.
Mhm.
And when I do it well, I feel good.
Yeah.
When I don't do it well, I know it's a failure on my part when I did not give good feedback and I put that employee in a bad situation where maybe this is going to be repeated, and that's on me as a leader.
Yeah. My fear is always, because I'm more of a direct person, that I'm not wording things appropriately to be more kind. So I think is the best way of putting it. Am
Mhm.
I being just too direct, and that sort of things off of there, when your heart's in the right place and you're trying to help and provide that good feedback, and then you put your foot in your mouth and it comes out totally wrong. So
But
that's always like a biggest fear in those
yeah,
conversations. That I always have with that. So
you do, but at the same time, I would probably, just from knowing you, say that your kindness is still going to be tempered, and it's better to be kind than to be nice and dance around the issue and not
yeah,
actually address the issue.
yeah, yeah,
I
definitely.
people want I have a few people that I have relationships with where I've told them I don't come to work every day to be an idiot. If you
Mm,
see me being an idiot, I'm giving you permission to tell me, "Hey,
yeah,
dude, you're being an idiot."
yeah,
We all need those people in our lives because sometimes you just don't see it,
yeah.
and so I think there's also that aspect of, as many times as possible when we can develop that relationship with someone else, to give them permission to speak truth into our life.
Mhm.
And this is where recurring one-on-ones, where you're learning about the person and understanding about them, I think those set a leader and a person they're leading up for a much better success criteria whenever you have to deliver constructive feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're working with, your direct reports or others around you off of this, that behavior is inspiring. And so whenever you're doing that, and I always kind of look at it, everyone that works for me, or however you want to phrase it, I want them to someday be in my spot,
Yeah,
and or at least to have the tools to be there, and whether they want to be in management or not, but to where hopefully that they will be where I'm at. And so what sort of advice do you have for our inspiring leaders out there that
yeah.
is wanting to maybe someday be the CISO or CIO, or maybe just a manager for that matter?
Yeah, so I think there's a tool that I've developed that I use with people, and I think we've talked about it before. It's called How I Want to Be Led.
Mm.
It's a series of 25 questions that I just ask an employee. This is basically the start of your user manual. I need to know what kind of makes you tick. What are the things that are important to you? And I ask them to rank 5 of them in rank order, and then we talk about them, because one of them might be inspire me. Um, and I'm going to ask, what would that look like? How would I know if I'm being successful? One might be, challenge me beyond my comfort zone. Okay, tell me what that looks like. One might be, give me the big picture of what we're doing, or put me in charge of something, stretch me, whatever. There's 25 of them, and I have it on my website, and it's free for people to get. I try to do that about every 18 months with my employees. I've got one person that's worked with me for 20 some odd years. If I see build trust with me come up on that, I know that's a problem, and it's a leadership problem. After 20 years, we should have a level of trust that is just table stakes.
Mhm.
And so it's a way to start a conversation to where I help the direct report understand, I'm only successful if you're successful, and I want to know how to help you be the most successful. And then some people will say, I don't have any desire to be in a leadership role. Please
Mhm.
don't make me do that. I want to be the best individual contributor. Okay. Then let's talk about, how do you become a SME, a deep SME? What is it you like doing? What is it you don't like doing? In our roles, there's so much variety, which is a great thing. There's a breadth of what we do that people can become really deep subject matter experts in so many different things. It's like, help me, tell me. Now, it may be that, okay, I realize you want to do that. You need to go work for Mark because he needs that. We don't need that in our shop. And so some of that is also an opportunity for us as we know each other. And I know that in the St. Louis community, particularly where we're at, we do share that. Hey, I'm looking for a person to do this. Do you know anybody? The best recommendation I would get is if you said, hey, I got this person on my team, they want to do that and we don't have the need for it, or I already have two people doing it. I mean, those are great recommendations.
Yeah, and we've seen that in our community where,
Yeah,
hey, I got this person, this is what they're aspiring to do. I can't, I don't want to see them go, but I want to help them get it, do
yeah,
this. And we've seen people snatch them up, so
yeah,
it's that whole networking thing that is such great value. That's how
yeah.
we became friends and everything else too. And it just, really adds to the value of what we do, I think. So,
Well, and to your point earlier, I mean, there's one CISO in an organization. There may
mhm,
be a few BSOs if you've got a large organization. There's a few managers, a larger number of team leads. When you've got a team lead that's ready to move in a manager role, you don't really want to put a lid on them
mhm,
because they're not going to be happy. They're going to look for another job anyway. So why not advocate for them on their behalf and help them find a great place to go work for another great leader? And if you don't know who those people are, then yeah, definitely go out and network. Find people, do some communication on LinkedIn, hit people up, and actually do what LinkedIn's supposed to be.
right.
It's not supposed to be a, hey, we got something in common. Do you want to buy my product? It's, hey, Mark,
That
I
never
see what you're
happens.
posting. Follow a Mark Ashworth, a Josh Brown, Andrew Wilder, people that are posting content and engage in real conversation with them.
Mhm.
It's possible to say, hey, I'd like to set up a call with you. Can we get 30 minutes? I would much rather give somebody that's an aspiring leader 30 minutes
Yep.
than two vendors 15 minutes.
Right.
Sorry, vendors, but I mean, I got more vested interest in helping people get better in our community.
Yeah, I agree. I would much rather have, and I've done this so many times, of someone just getting out of school or something like that, wanting
Yeah,
advice on technology, career path, those sort of things, versus, the daily barrage of someone saying, hey, I have a product coming out of stealth or whatever. I'd like to
right,
get your perspective. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, it's like I want to help, but I'm going to pick and choose which
right.
those conversations are because you
Yep.
only got so much time.
Well,
So,
I've got a guy that I know is transitioning out of the Navy right now, and because of what we do, our mission is to, you know, serve the veteran community with originating loans, but it's also to enhance lives of people.
mhm,
So I've talked to him 2 or 3 different times about what's it look like to transition from military to civilian cybersecurity. I love those conversations,
mhm,
and I think he's probably going to land a place somewhere in Seattle. I've connected him up with a couple people there. He's moving from Japan. That's a fantastic um, experience from my
mhm.
standpoint. I love those
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah, me too. Those are the ones to help mentor somebody. It's, really makes you feel good about what you're doing versus the load and the pressure that you get
Yeah.
as, being in cyber and technology and stuff in general. So we've talked about a lot of, inspiring new leaders, but where do you think the career path is for CISOs going now? Some, might be going to board, some might, take this could be a lateral leap over to the CIO position. Where do you think people are going to, or are they staying a CISO, or we're just
Um,
retiring?
I think it's all of those. I mean, if you're in a gathering of CISOs and you look around, there's a lot of gray and white hair.
Yeah.
We all been doing this for a while. We probably built the program where we're at, and so I think the first next step is: have you developed your replacement? Do you have a succession plan that is an effective succession plan involving the person that, should you say, okay, I'm going to retire today, or I'm going to go do something else? So I think that's the first step, is making sure that we've trained that next person and brought them along. and help them develop the same relationships within the organization if they didn't already have them themselves, to where they know who the right people are to go talk to. At that point, when you're comfortable that you're not going to leave your organization in the lurch, wow, there's so many things to do. Yeah, there's board work you could do. It could be move on to another CISO role. There's other than about 100 people, there are lots of jobs that are going to be like the next biggest thing you could do.
Mhm.
They're not going to come along very often, but that could be a thing. We're seeing with the SEC ruling this last year and some of the other regulatory things come out, a lot more opportunities if people want to hang out their own shingle and go do fractional or virtual CISO work,
Mhm.
consulting. Depends on really what you want to do. You and I've talked about this is kind of
Yeah.
preparing us for our next thing of what's it look like. I have a small coaching business. I love coaching cybersecurity leaders particularly, but leaders in general of how to be better as a leader, but also just how to move past a stuck place.
Mhm.
And so coaching is a place that we could look at. What we haven't seen a lot of, and I'd love to see more, is CISOs being innovative and starting their own companies, moving into other C-level roles, whether it's CEO. I think you have both a CISO and a CIO hat
Mhm.
together, don't you?
Well, yeah. Well, I have some operational aspects under. I got 4 groups, and I even have financial crime, so it's not even just cyber that's underneath me. And I got physical, I got networking, financial crimes, and cyber. And then I have a partner that's the CIO. That's that's a peer to me and stuff off
Yeah.
there, at least in my here at First Bank and stuff. So yeah,
And I think so. There's a lot of places like that we could go.
right.
It's really a matter of where do we really feel called and led as our next thing to go.
Yeah. So, going to change it up here a little bit as we're kind of wrapping up here towards the end of the podcast. So, to some questions, I'm going to at least try to ask for the time being everybody. So, just some short, quick thoughts off of here. What is something that the security industry could do better?
I was just talking about this with somebody this morning. We need to talk without bringing in the jargon and all the major scary stories, but talk about stories of how to secure people in their home life and in their individual life, and also help them understand what it means to develop a security mindset. I was driving in this morning, the radio, they were talking about these texts that are going around of, hey, you forgot to pay a toll.
Mhm.
The radio is putting out security awareness messages now. How are we joining in with that and helping people understand how to secure themselves better with as little jargon as we can and explaining the why? But
Mhm. Yeah. I always say, and I've said it in multiple podcasts and webinars and stuff, it should be CTSO, Chief Translator Security Officer, because we got to do that
yeah,
translation
yep,
from the technical
yep,
to, non-gobbledygook, basically. So,
yeah, yeah.
so another question here: what are you tired of hearing about?
Oh, Gen AI. And especially when people are like, well, you have to use Gen AI to fight Gen AI. Well, if Gen AI is only good for generating better social engineering schemes, we maybe have already lost. And I don't think that's what it's going to be used for, but it's become wearisome. There's not a single day that goes by that somebody doesn't talk about how Gen AI is making security less secure.
Yeah,
And they may be
yeah,
right. I don't know.
yeah, and it's not like we've been hearing in the industry for the last 5 to 10 years about AI, and then most of the time it wasn't truly AI; it's just machine learning. So that
Right,
doesn't help out any either.
right.
So we're kind of in the first few weeks here in January 2025. So, what's your predictions for 2025? What sort of things you think are going to be we're going to be seeing in the cyber world happening this year?
I think some of it is more of the same until we get better security around phishing and education around phishing. It's still working, or the attackers wouldn't do it. But it also does feel like there's going to be some pivot to moving away from some of the human aspects of what's it look like. There is a lot of software that's being developed that is prone to supply chain attacks.
Mhm.
We've seen a little bit of this with SolarWinds. We've seen it with some other entities as well. Making sure that the people we're doing business with and the software that we're incorporating into our technology stacks are doing the right things. I think we're also going to have to be thoughtful about, do we want to be compliant or do we want to be secure?
Mhm.
Because there's so many regulations that come out now that we may be chasing too much after the compliance piece. Compliance should be a natural outcome of a strong security program, and not taking our eyes off the ball of do the basics. Do the basics, and then it doesn't matter what the attack is. If you're doing the basics really well, you can defend those attacks.
Mhm.
So that's we're talking about that in our shop. Of let's go back to basics of what that looks like, and make sure we're not missing something there. And then let the shiny things and the new vendors that are out there. It's a dizzying array of products. Let that kind of consolidate down a little bit, and somebody else fight those initial battles, and then people like you and I can talk about, all right, what are you doing about this particular Gartner new quadrant of whatever?
Yeah.
Let the dust settle a little.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Randy, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here. I'm inspired as always as listening to you and stuff, and always enjoy our conversation. So thank you very much. And I'll definitely have to have you come back on to continue this leadership discussion. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm honored to be your second guest. So hopefully this will kick off and won't derail you, but it'll just get you going down the path. So look
Sounds
forward to
great.
seeing you in person soon, and I do appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today.
All right. Thank you.